And thank you all for coming and braving the rain. When I walked across campus, it was raining. Coming on election day, and I want to thank sincerely also the Wayne State University Humanities Center for inviting me to talk. Like the doctor says, I've really enjoyed attending these talks as frequently as I can, as my schedule allows, and I've found them very interesting, enlightening. I'm always interested to see what my colleagues are doing research and writing on. So it's fun, and I do mean that, to be on the other side of the talk today. So this is basically a walk through 150 years as we round out the sesquicentennial year of Wayne State and what we now know as Wayne State through pictures. All of the pictures are from the Walter P. Reuther library here on campus, the archives where I work, right on Cass. So, with no further ado, and hopefully also you guys all have questions. I encourage you guys to pepper me with questions. I want this to be a conversation. Whatever your curiosity piques from any of these images, just fire away. And if I don't know the answer, it's fun for me to find the answer for people. So, Wayne State, of course, what we now know as Wayne State University is clocked back to the year 1868. It began with the Detroit Medical College, what is now obviously our School of Medicine, and it was started thanks to 5 Civil War physicians who obviously very soon after that bloody conflict saw the need for professional training for doctors and nurses. And that remained the core of what we now know as Wayne State, with what we now know as the School of Education joining in 1881. You can see that the structure sustained a fire 18 years after the college was established, and this structure was then repaired, and it remained as the structure that the School of Medicine used until 1954. And obviously now we have the Detroit Medical Center, which this building is not only gone now, unfortunately, even though it's a very beautiful building, but it's vastly expanded from this. Really important point, not only interesting, well, a few points. Obviously, this is the Detroit Junior College, and I will get to the structure a little bit more in a couple of decades, but up until the 30s, Wayne was a collection of public colleges. And we have the Detroit Junior College here. So last year, our athletics program celebrated 100 years, which is very exciting. Also, 1917 is an important year because this was the year that the Michigan State Legislature authorized the Detroit Junior College with a 2-year curriculum, and that was with David Mackenzie as dean. So probably many of you know the David Mackenzie House, which is on Cass Avenue, and of course there's a lot of talk right now about that house and it potentially getting moved for the expansion of the Hillberry Theater, and the creation of a larger fine arts complex for the university. David Mackenzie was not only the head of what is now Wayne State University at this time, but he was also the head of the Detroit Public Schools. And he really developed public schooling in the city of Detroit as we know it, for many age groups, obviously, K through graduate level. He was a very much a pioneer. And so I think this is a really important point about our university, is that Wayne State has always been sort of moving in tandem with the city of Detroit. So interestingly and importantly, in the 1920s, the city of Detroit tripled, and I mean that is fairly astounding. I don't get surprised often, but knowing that the city tripled in size, in population in the 1920s, obviously the public university, the public schooling offering had to hopefully match its pace. And so the colleges of the city of Detroit did, and obviously with more students, more staff, more faculty, and this area gobbling up surrounding buildings, student life grew too. So we can see that in some of the pictures coming up. Here's the first sorority on campus, and the annual Frosh Soft Games was a big deal. This looks pretty brutal to me, but it would be kind of fun in a kind of masochistic way, I'm sure. The huge medicine ball. So one of the colleges was the College of Pharmacy. Katie Moy Lim obviously was the first female, and she was the first Chinese American graduate of that college. She was not only important throughout her career in the Detroit medical community, but she was also important in the business community, as was her family. The Moys were prominent in what used to be Chinatown. If you don't know, what is part of the Cass Corridor used to be a very vibrant Chinatown. And when I lived here as a student, there were remnants of that. I think with the change in the neighborhood, those echoes are disappearing. But the Moys owned a very active and popular Chinese restaurant in the neighborhood for decades. This is a really important illustration, I think, of something that Wayne State can lay claim to, and that is integration before many other colleges and universities in a few different ways, and certainly through its athletics. That was obviously 10 years after the athletics program was created. And through the 1930s, what was then known as Wayne University had a really notable, certainly regionally, a very notable cross-country team. They were notable, obviously, for their undefeated record, but they also were really noted for their cohesiveness as a team. And I mean, obviously, this is like a great illustration of that cohesiveness. So I promised that I would get back to what the structure of those 6 different independent, well, not entirely independent, but largely independent, loosely aligned 6 public colleges came to be. So, and I want to get you guys the actual, think, yes, I do have. So basically what the structure came to be was the 6 colleges of the city of Detroit joined into one university. So it was a city university at that point. This was, so that was medicine, that was education, that was liberal arts, pharmacy, education, and the graduate school. First president of what was called Wayne University at that point, because remember it's a city university, it's a municipal entity, was Frank Cody. And interesting administrative structure here that was certainly unusual at the time and is absolutely unusual now is that, and we were talking about it before too, right? That the Detroit Public Schools from the start, from the 1880s when the School of Education, what is now the School of Education, was developed, really was sewn into the administrative structure and administration of Wayne University. So we were under the Detroit Board of Education, and so for example, the archives where I work, we have not only obviously that I take care of the records of the university, but we also have the records of DPS, the Detroit Public Schools, and that's the reason. It's pretty interesting. So as more students got pumped out and graduated, there needed to be some kind of glue to hold everybody together. And you heard me being away, you know, when I graduated from Wayne State in '02, being out of state, I found my alumni association particularly important for making me feel connected to my university, and I feel that way also about my college. So that was formed in '35. It's really interesting on the what do we want to say, on the precipice of World War World War II, at least for America here, is that we can see the activism that Wayne State students have been practicing for generations here. Throughout World War II, we have records in the archives of a very, what do I want to say, very vocal and vibrant body of students who, for various reasons, came together against the war. And obviously here they are, you know, fighting, making their voices known. I just love this shot. It's great to have all women doing their biology studies together. You could argue that this is an illustration of Wayne State educating women in STEAM professions way ahead of the curve. And of course, too, with our School of Education starting in the 1880s, we have been an educator of the educators for decades, and that too, particularly at this time with our administrative structure really tied into the Detroit public school system. You know, this was a direct pipeline to educate students to educate students. And that partnership obviously continues to this day. A word on our former mascot. It has not been without its problems. This is the quote-unquote Tartar. I believe when I was a student, we were still known as the Tartars. In both female and male forms here. it was loosely, what do I want to say, loosely aligned with a very Eastern Asian ethnic group, the Tartars, and folks here kind of mixed it up with the Mongols. A saving grace is that for decades there was not a bona fide branding, if you will, of a logo. It has appeared in various guises in things like the yearbooks, student publications through the years, but it wasn't until the 1990s that Asian American students protested when the university did come out with a more sort of solidified branding. And it was if you see it, it's very questionable. So that led to change, again, through student protest and student voices. And as the world stepped into World War, the campus absolutely did. Again, it's that reflection of the wider world that Wayne State has always been echoing. And important service and important office that continues to this day for our campus community is the Office of Veterans Affairs. Obviously, it was formed in '44 as our armed forces came back as veterans, and to serve them as a growing student body. And probably many of you know, if you haven't seen the model that's in Old Main, we do have the honor of something that's unusual for most universities and colleges around America. We are one of the few universities to have a warship named after us. This was the SS Wayne Victory, and it was a cargo ship on the Pacific. It obviously served until the end of World War II, which luckily wasn't soon thereafter. It served as well into the Korean War. It served into the Vietnamese War, the Vietnam War. Then when the federal government in the 90s got ready to hand the records over, we have those records now. So that's pretty exciting. So we walk into post-World War II. Again, this is a huge change for our campus. There were all these veterans, right, and they were returning. Their partners were benefiting also from the GI Bill. And so the campus just swelled. So lots more students. The university really tried it tried to keep up, basically. It was running to provide housing, provide classrooms. You can see a lot of the surrounding structures around our campus were temporary housing. Quonset huts were built for housing. A lot of the houses were used for classrooms, for offices, student service, offices as well. So here's a Tartar football game. You can see the student section seating in there. It looks pretty fun. And here's, a sign of some of the real innovation that Wayne State has always had. We were the first university in the Midwest to have a computational lab. And obviously they're much different than our computers of now, but it's a really, really compelling photo, I think. more innovation, certainly from our School of Medicine, and continues to innovate. This is one of our sort of crown jewels in terms of innovations across our disciplines. But this is when the Dodrell pump that enabled medical professionals making open heart surgery possible for the first time. And to match that medical innovation, the Master of Science in Nursing program was established soon thereafter, and our medical professionals certainly serve the metro area, and they serve beyond. It's hard to find a corner of the world that is not benefited from our medical school and the professionals that we graduate. 1956 is a really key year, not only for the beautiful building that we know as McGregor Memorial Conference Center, that I'm sure most of you know and probably have attended many events at, designed by world famous architect and Metro Detroit based architect Minoru Yamasaki, who designed the World Trade Centers, obviously. But 1956 also was the year that we became a state university. And again, with that, I'm pretty sure I've got, yes, I've got a number here, so I wanted to make sure to get it right. So then Governor G. Menon Williams, also known as Soapy Williams, in this year he signed Public Act 183, which basically made us a state school. So that was a switch over in this year from being a city university in Wayne University to Wayne State University. Really, really critical year in terms of our ever expanding growth, and obviously how we were governed as well. The creativity of our campus in the fine arts just needs to be underlined. This is a great shot. I just really love their matching ties and their monogrammed jackets. This was a musical quartet, and I wish we had a recording of them singing. This too, in terms of sort of thinking about what was then and what is now, it underlines that we're always talking right now about the change of our university to an increasingly residential campus, which is a real different kind of identity for us as a university. But there have always been students living on campus. Webster Hall is no longer, but this is a really great shot of two young women living in that dormitory, first dormitory on campus. Here, and I love this laser, that's really cool. When I taught for 13 years at IU, I never had a laser pointer, so that's pretty fun. But you can see, here, super new structures, right? This is the School of Education that's one building over from us, and McGregor. But there are streets coming through, and both of these structures are designed by Yamasaki, notably. City Beyond. So the campus through the 60s is growing and expanding, but we still are not pedestrian friendly, shall we say. So here's another super interesting piece, I think, of international history, of city history, and university history all sort of sewn up into one package. And that's the 1965 bid for the 1968 International Olympics. Now, City of Detroit did not get it. But then Mayor Kavanaugh, Jerome Kavanaugh, made a bid. Mexico City won the bid for the '68 Olympics, but one of several benefits, even though we didn't get the Olympics to come to the city of Detroit, was we gained a really important structure on campus, and that is the Math-I Physical Education and Recreation Building right across the freeway. And that was a building when, I was a student. I want to say the first year I was a student here, that's where I was working out. And there was a big pit in the ground, and that's where the fitness center is now. So then the following year, I want to say I was able to work out at the fitness center right in the heart of campus. Great shot, pretty artistic from the 1960s, students on campus. And '68 obviously was the centennial of the university, and that was a year like we've had this year of a lot of birthday making, of events, lectures, important reflection on Wayne State's contribution to the city, Southeast Michigan, the state of Michigan, the country and beyond. And this remains my favorite logo, and I think it's just me, but I think the university should pick it back up again because it's pretty awesome. I see temporary tattoos, for example, as a start. As the campus grew in terms of buildings, a really interesting thing is that some of the buildings that were built were some of the first in the country in terms of being ADA compliant. So it meant that a lot of students who were wheelchair bound saw this as a place of opportunity. And something that came out of this, growing part of our student population, was also that student athletes grew as a place of opportunity too. That's not well worded, but so in '68 there was 12 students who joined the Michigan Wheelchair Games, and then they went on to 5 of that 12 core went on to serve in the U.S. Olympics. So that's pretty interesting. For those of you who may not know, we had some really significant shark research on campus, and over on, I want to get this right, on Hancock, and I do have the address. It's not there anymore, but there was basically an ocean, quote unquote, a huge tank for 2 different kinds of sharks that were researched by a team that was built. And that research went on for a few decades. Pretty interesting. It was notable research internationally. More student activism, and obviously in 1970 this is the burgeoning of the environmental movement, and we have echoes of that in terms of our campus footprint that we have to possibly thank these student activists for, like the having less streets in the middle of our campus, having bike infrastructure, both on campus and in the surrounding neighborhood, and certainly throughout the city. As a cyclist, I very much appreciate that personally. The College of Engineering needs definitely a shout out here in terms of a lot of things that the College of Engineering has been doing for decades, but particularly too, this is a great example of its partnership with the city, with the community, and really listening to the needs of the community and building accordingly. So this is an example of an innovation to build, design, research, design, and make happen a more accessible bus. So in terms of that campus footprint and having less streets, we have then President George Gullin in the late 70s to thank. Gullin was really a mastermind at seeing the campus footprint as a really accessible campus to all different kinds of people. And he was, it took a lot of state money, but he was one to take the streets out where we saw streets in the middle of campus before and make walkable walkways for all of us. And one of my favorite Wayne State alum, Casey Kasem, who I just love him even more now that he happens to be a Wayne State graduate. He was one of our like big branding, what do I want to say? He was the voice of Wayne State throughout the 1980s on radio, TV, obviously billboards. And, you know, I grew up with him, as many of you guys probably did. And just love him even more now that he's a Wayne State grad, grew up in Detroit, and he grew up as part of a Lebanese immigrant family. He's got a really interesting story. As the AIDS HIV epidemic in America raged on, Wayne State and the School of Medicine tried to match that pace of destruction with innovation and activism. And the drug AZT, many of you guys know, was seen as one of the first truly effective drugs against the fight against AIDS. And that, thanks to our School of Medicine and Dr. Horowitz, that became the first federally branded drug against AIDS, HIV. And celebration of diversity on campus has happened for many decades, certainly through lots of important scholarship and critical discussion and educational opportunities, but also through fun things like the International Student Fair. That's always been one of my favorite things that has happened on campus. And here we are in the Faculty Administration Building, the FAB, right? It's interesting to see the construction of the building, and then obviously to see the city beyond, and just how, you know, more evidence of the campus always morphing and changing and growing. Garth Fagan is also a super important alumni, and also illustration of some of our best in terms of fine arts accomplishments. I know many of you probably know and maybe love The Lion King. He was a big deal when he was a student here. He led the dance troupe. We have a lot of programs at the archives with him highlighted. We had a professional dance troupe from New York come through the archives a few months ago, and they were very excited to know that Garth Fagan graduated from Wayne State. And what could be more, what do I want to say, relevant on election day? One of our current, you know, living alum who's incredibly notable, destined to rise to serious office. We'll see. I'll just let it show. I voted for her today. I was very excited to vote for her today. So, more very, very cool, kind of a twofer here. Just beautiful shot, obviously. Great partnership between the city of Detroit and our Wayne State University Police Department. With the Freedom Fireworks that happen every year. And, just that our police department is known around the nation in terms of particularly university police units as being really groundbreaking. And, the mounted police is one innovation that they've brought into the campus community that a lot of urban universities don't have. And finally, our current president, Roy Wilson, he's the 12th president of Wayne State, and getting sworn in here by the also very notable Judge Damon Keith, that of course our Keith Center at the law school is named after Damon Keith, swearing President Wilson in. Of course, in the short time that Wilson has been president, a lot of changes on our campus and a lot more changes to come. So there's innovations thanks to President Wilson. We've seen some major donations to the university, including School of Business going downtown, thanks to a multi-million-dollar donation. I mentioned, obviously, the Fine Arts Complex on Cass Avenue and what that's going to be looking like. There are numerous innovations in terms of teaching and learning that has happened thanks to President Wilson, and the list goes on. But I think that's all I've got, and like I say, all of the images are from the archives here on campus. And please feel free to contact me, whether it's right now, or you can get a hold of me via email or phone number. And I always love to talk about Wayne State, my alma mater, and the place that has given me the career that I enjoy now. So enough about me. I want to hear from you guys. Any questions that you guys have? Thank you. Yes?
I was really struck by a number of those photos from the 30s through the 50s that made a point of highlighting racial integration. Mm-hmm. Two women living together in a room, two men together studying almost intimately. They're holding the book together. Right. Was that was that just something that happened, or were those deliberate selling points that they wanted public images of? Again, in the 60s, that's one thing, but in the 30s and 40s, that would strike me as rather transgressive, if anything.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, and that's sort of, why I mentioned particularly with that example even earlier in the 20s of the athletics program and the fact that it was integrated from the get-go, from its establishment in 1917, and how different that was than most any other, with some exceptions in America, but most any other, certainly private, but then public university and college as well. So, it could be argued that those great shots that I love, and that's why I included them, of the two women in Webster Hall in the first dorm, and then also the two male students studying on campus. It's a very artistic shot from above. Those were PR shots, but I do think that it illustrates something about our campus, and I don't know if I have a really, hard yes or no answer to your question, but I do think that, this was in the middle of a time of great progressivism, in a lot of ways, and certainly here in the city of Detroit, Wayne State really answered the needs for the growing industrial machine that was the city of Detroit. And we all know that unionism was built on social justice issues, and in large part talked about the need for racial and ethnic and gender equality. So, I do think that what's now Wayne State University has sort of walked along the side of changes, certainly of the city of Detroit, but also, what do I want to say? It reflected the city, but it also echoed the city. So, I hope that answers in part your question. Other questions? Yeah.
You had a slide up there, Old Main in 1936. Was it always known as Old Main, or?
That's a really good question. So what we now know as Old Main actually was built as Central High School, and it was built in the 1880s, and that, again, is part of our partnership originally with the Detroit Public Schools. And so in the 20s, I can't remember the exact date, was when Central High vacated and it moved to what is now its present location right by up by New Center. And of course that structure is changing. What's now known as of this past year as the Durfee Innovation Center, and they're doing some really interesting work there now, but that was Central High for decades. And they actually have a really nice relationship with Wayne State because of that original partnership. It's pretty interesting, I think. Yes?
Did you, in your work on the celebration of 150th, see much of the history between DMC and Wayne State?
Yeah, that's a good question. There have been a lot of people very interested in that large question, but then also various aspects of that question. Dr. Larry Stevenson has been in the archives for a few years now, pretty religiously. So Dr. Stevenson is a long time, now emeritus faculty member of Wayne State, and he was an active physician at the DMC. And let's see, I'm pretty sure it has been officially published. It's a book out by Wayne State Press. It's a comprehensive history of what's now the Wayne State School of Medicine. And Dr. Stevenson has been really great to work with. And my colleague Kathy Schmeling has really helped him for quite a long time, very closely with his research on that. Yeah.
So just going back to Old Main, I was wondering if you knew if there's been a time through its history when all of the clock faces have consistently shown the correct time.
I love that question. So yeah, that's totally hilarious because it's pretty to look at, but like totally unreliable. We do have records in the so what's now the student newspaper, the South End, It's had different names through the decades, the Detroit Collegian, the Daily Collegian. I should know, and I feel like there was at least one other title. Anyway, the student newspaper had a really great, and I think it was published also in the yearbook, in the teens, of, it was some really clever, super short poem about, and of course I can't get the words right, but it was like something like, yeah, like when hell freezes over, that's when the four faces of the clock are going to show the right time all together. So they worded that much more cleverly than I did, but it's, to paraphrase.
They spent like $42 million renovating that back when I was a student here, at the same time you were, like 93 to 2003. I was always amazed that they spent $42 million on
Yeah, some of the dollar amounts on the building projects here on campus will, you just put your faith that your tax dollars are going in the right order there, because it is a lot. Yeah. Anybody else? Questions? Yeah.
Question. There's also a lot of tension between the university and the surrounding community. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing that up. So I mentioned Gullin, President Gullin, as being someone who, you know, presidents before Gullin did a lot to re-engineer basically the footprint of the neighborhood and the campus, but Gullin did maybe even more than most administrators. There absolutely was tension, and arguably still continues with the rapid changes that we're having in the city of Detroit right now. Through Gullin's administration and before him as well, there were presidents of Wayne State University who took eminent domain to basically move people out of their homes and shuttle them out, hopefully with some kind of, you know, buyout package, if you will, that was favorable to them. That's debatable. And maybe it wasn't necessarily in their favor. Maybe they didn't get the amount on their homes that they really deserved and that they should have gotten from the university. But the university took those buildings anyhow, and also that an important, as from the 70s to now, what we know now as Preservation Detroit started actually as, you know, by its name. If you're not familiar with that nonprofit, it's a body that seeks to preserve historic structures around the city of Detroit. It started as Preservation Wayne, and that was thanks to the activism of some concerned students who saw the university just buying up all of these homes and beautiful structures in the neighborhood and mowing most of them down. Some of the very old homes that are sort of part of campus and, you know, sort of plunked down in the middle of some, you know, very modern structures around it, are thanks to that student activism. And those students, you know, also went on as administrators in various capacities and worked with the city to preserve structures. So yes.
In college in about the early mid-80s, enrollment was really down, and then shortly thereafter is when there was all kinds of new buildings put in. You know anything about that process? And Is that the reason why they did it? To try to blow it up?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think it's arguably, it's always a pattern, you know, of universities. Wayne State in doing that, yes. So the short answer is yes, and you know, you guys have heard my track record. So I was at two, you know, first a Jewish college, and then I was at, you know, in the IU system for 13 years. Colleges and universities do this, you know, and they do it for various reasons, but yeah, ostensibly it's very much to you know, grow and attract their base, which is students. Yeah.
What do you see as Wayne State doing next? Like, I know there's these new student housing buildings going up on Anthony Wayne, but you know of any other like major projects? It seems like the campus is running out of room to build stuff. I know, like, I think they put up 7 buildings in the time I was here. This whole, you know, stretch of Anthony Wayne was redone. I mean, is there any other big projects that they could fit?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, you know, of course we've had the School of Business, like I was mentioning before, just this year, move from right in the middle of campus to downtown. That's huge, and that was like $40 million donation. Talking about big money, and that was, you know, thanks to the Illiches. I also mentioned this very well, I should say very soon in coming. We'll see, but it's probably the project that's closest to us time-wise, and that is that fine arts facility with Hilberry Theater on Cass, you know, expanding, and ostensibly the David Mackenzie House, you know, being president of the college, that's getting expanded. Theoretically, the house is getting moved. That's major, and you know, the blueprints for that are beautiful. But it's more of, you know, to get back to Lewis's question, it's absolutely not been without its tension. You know, this historic structure on our campus getting picked up and moved for something else to grow and expand to something different. It absolutely has its proponents, but it has its objectors too. It's interesting. Wayne State is never without, you know, interesting stories, I think. Keeps me interested. So.
You know that there was a Mackenzie Hall on campus.
Yeah.
That there you now have the bookstore and parking lot there. So there was a footprint on campus of the Mackenzie.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And that was such an important building. It had so many offices and services in that building. By the time I was a student here, they had bulldozed it, and there were, and those are gone now. There were these like kind of shoddy 1970s, and that's judgmental. They were storefronts, you know. There was a diner I used to go to, you know, where the Welcome Center is now. It's always changing. It's super interesting. Yeah. So